Emily Parker stepped back, her fingers still curled around the necklace, feeling the cool metal bite lightly into her palm. She swallowed hard, trying to force her heartbeat to slow, but the tightness in her chest only grew. The man in the black suit remained motionless, just a few feet away, his gaze never leaving her face. His posture, upright and controlled, radiated an authority that made the air around him seem heavier, charged with a quiet intensity that whispered of experience and meticulous precision. She could sense him weighing every possibility, every reaction she might have, yet he made no move that threatened, only a subtle shift of the shoulders as if to acknowledge her presence fully. Around them, the gala continued, though the music and laughter seemed to recede into a distant hum, swallowed by the focus of his gaze and the sudden awareness of how fragile her equilibrium had become. She dared not speak, her mouth dry, throat tight. The necklace glinted in the soft chandelier light, its anchor pendant catching the glow in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as though designed to attract attention, to draw eyes and unknowingly stir memories. Victor Romano lifted his hand slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of the silver chain without touching it. The movement measured, careful, like an unspoken inquiry without accusation. Emily's breath caught. Her muscles tensed instinctively, and she realized the smallest motion, a blink or a tilt of her head, would be scrutinized and catalogued. Her mind raced, trying to process why this simple object elicited such a reaction, why the air had become taut and almost solid around them. She thought of leaving, slipping past the crowd unnoticed, but every instinct warned her that the path was narrowed, that he had seen and comprehended far more than she could imagine. Yet there was no hostility in his presence, only a piercing clarity, a focus that seemed almost painfully attuned to her every gesture. She stepped back cautiously, navigating around the glint of champagne glasses and polished marble floors, feeling the tension in her own movements as he mirrored her subtle adjustments, following without overt pursuit. The warmth of the ballroom, the chatter, and the clinking of silverware seemed to belong to another world entirely, a world from which she had been temporarily removed, suspended in this precise moment of recognition and uncertainty. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny settling onto her, not as a threat, but as a silent, undeniable acknowledgement that the necklace was more than a trinket, that it held significance she could barely understand. Every second stretched, elongated by the intensity of being fully observed, each beat of her heart synchronized with the measured pace of his calm, deliberate attention. She realized that in this charged stillness, secrets could be revealed, truths laid bare without a word, and that the fragile balance between discovery and discretion rested entirely on the way she chose to move, to breathe, to exist in this narrowed space. Her fingers tightened reflexively around the pendant, as if holding on to something solid in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. Her eyes never leaving his, the storm-blue depths reflecting a past she had never known and a present she could not escape. Victor's eyes softened fractionally, a subtle shift imperceptible to anyone else in the room. Yet to Emily it was like a crack of light breaking through dense clouds, a hint that understanding or explanation might follow, that the story hinted at by the necklace was only beginning to unfold, and that she had already crossed a threshold from ordinary to irrevocably intertwined in a history that demanded attention and reckoning. Every instinct in her urged stillness, awareness, and care as she stood rooted, the silver chain between her fingers catching the light, a signal, a bridge, a silent message between the past and what was yet to come. Emily Parker took a hesitant step backward, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses fading into the background as Victor Romano's storm-blue eyes remained locked on hers, each heartbeat echoing in the spaces between them. The pendant of the necklace reflected the chandelier light, casting fleeting glimmers across her fingers as if it were alive, whispering a story only partially known, a past entwined with secrets she could not yet name. Her palms grew slightly damp despite the controlled temperature of the room, and she adjusted the strap of her apron, feeling the subtle friction of fabric against her skin, a tangible reminder of the ordinary life she had clung to all evening. Victor's gaze did not waver, and Emily realized that in the quiet intensity of his presence, he was not merely observing the object in her hand but reading the nuances of her posture, the rhythm of her breath, the tiny hesitations that betrayed both caution and curiosity. She wanted to ask why he was here, what connection he could possibly see in this simple chain. Yet the words seemed to dissolve before reaching her lips, leaving only the rising awareness of the delicate tension that stretched between them. Around them, chandeliers cast soft, fragmented reflections on polished marble, the golden light dancing across the meticulously arranged tables. Yet none of it penetrated the space they had inadvertently created, a bubble suspended in time where observation and inference outweighed any background noise. Emily felt the cool weight of the necklace pressing against her fingertips, grounding her even as her thoughts spiraled, tracing back over fleeting memories, faint recollections of conversations long past, of a mother she had scarcely known and of hints of a world she had only glimpsed through fragments. Victor took a slow, deliberate step forward, the subtle shift in his stance measured, unhurried, yet charged with an imperceptible urgency, as if every movement contained layered meaning, each gesture a question unanswered. She could see the faint arch of his brow, the subtle tightening of his jaw, and a flicker of recognition that seemed to cross the chasm of years, bridging what was lost and what was about to unfold. The sound of her own breath felt intrusive, loud against the steady rhythm of the ballroom music that now seemed distant, abstract, unimportant. Emily knew she could not retreat without drawing attention, not simply from him, but from the momentum that had begun, an invisible pull of fate and revelation guiding both of their steps toward a confrontation neither had anticipated but both could not avoid. Victor's hand rose slightly, a gesture that seemed to blend command with inquiry, inviting disclosure without force, and Emily's gaze followed the motion, understanding instinctively that this was not a threat but an opportunity, the first tangible bridge across the gap of mystery that had defined the pendant's journey to her. A gentle shift in his stance suggested patience, yet patience tempered by expectation, a quiet insistence that she acknowledged the significance of what lay before them, the history encoded in the necklace and the unspoken truths it carried. Emily felt a tremor of apprehension, quickly followed by a pulse of determination. She would not collapse under the weight of uncertainty, not now, not when clarity was within reach, however small or fragile it might be. The world outside the immediate circle of light, the crowd, the laughter, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume seemed to fade entirely as she lifted her eyes once more to meet his storm blue meeting green, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding that the necklace had become more than a mere trinket, more than a relic of past grief. It had become the key to a story that demanded attention, comprehension, and perhaps a new path forward. Victor's lips parted, a measured breath, an almost imperceptible murmur that carried authority, curiosity, and a hint of vulnerability, and Emily felt the fragile threads of their intertwined histories begin to weave themselves into a pattern neither had anticipated. A narrative unfolding in real time, delicate, electric, and irrevocable. The beginning of a sequence of revelations that would test, challenge, and ultimately redefine both of their lives in ways that shimmered just beyond the edge of understanding. The soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses continued around Emily Parker, but it might as well have been a distant murmur compared to the intensity of the moment. She adjusted her grip on the necklace, noticing how the silver chain reflected the chandelier light in small, flickering pulses that seemed synchronized with the rapid beat of her own heart. Victor Romano stepped closer, his polished black shoes making no sound on the marble floor, yet each step carried an invisible weight, a presence that seemed to press gently against the edges of the world around them. Emily felt a tremor of anticipation and apprehension intertwine, a sensation that prickled the back of her neck and spread down her arms, and she held herself still, careful to match the rhythm of her breathing to the soft pulse of her racing pulse. Victor's eyes, sharp and storm blue, remained locked on hers, searching for recognition, for understanding, for the slightest flicker of acknowledgement that the necklace held more than mere metal and pendant. She shifted subtly, cautious not to startle him, and in that small motion, she noticed the careful observation in the tilt of his head, the way his jawline tightened imperceptibly, and she realized he was measuring not just her actions but her intent, each thought and hesitation layered into the silent conversation between them. Around the edges of the ballroom, the glittering crowd moved with effortless grace, glasses raised, laughter flowing, unaware of the quiet gravity that had seized this corner of the room. Emily could sense the way the chain pulsed lightly against her fingers as though resonating with the unspoken dialogue, and a sudden clarity struck her. The object was not just a relic of the past, but a bridge to a story that had long been waiting to resurface. A narrative woven into memory, grief, and recognition that neither of them could ignore. Victor's presence remained commanding yet measured, and Emily noted the subtle softening around his eyes, a fleeting vulnerability that suggested not threat but curiosity and an almost unspoken need for understanding. The quiet was punctuated only by the soft murmur of the string quartet, a delicate undercurrent to the tension between them, as if time itself had paused to witness the tentative steps toward revelation. She drew in a slow breath, feeling the cool air against her skin, the faint scent of perfume and polished wood, and realized that she had a choice, to recoil and retreat into anonymity or to acknowledge the gravity of the moment, the silent invitation to participate in the uncovering of a past that had been carefully concealed. Victor inclined his head slightly, an almost imperceptible motion that seemed to nudge her toward comprehension, toward engagement, toward the first thread of trust forming in a space dense with curiosity and latent recognition. The pendant swung lightly as she adjusted it in her palm, each flicker of light across the metal a reminder of the weight it carried, the hidden significance, the story embedded within its smooth curves and anchored symbolism. Emily felt the collision of ordinary life with the extraordinary, the mingling of her own small, deliberate gestures with the invisible gravity of history pressing through the strands of silver and light. She could feel the moment stretching, each second elongated, electric with potential, and she knew that the narrative poised between them was fragile yet potent, delicate yet unyielding, and that the choice she made in the next instant, however subtle, would set in motion a sequence that would illuminate hidden truths, forge unexpected connections, and transform the quiet presence of a simple necklace into a catalyst for discovery, understanding, and an unfolding story that had waited too long to remain untold. Emily Parker felt a subtle shift in the tension around her as Victor Romano remained poised, the storm-blue depths of his eyes reflecting both focus and a trace of unspoken curiosity. She adjusted her stance, heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor, each step measured to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the gala guests, whose laughter and murmured conversations had begun to bleed back into her awareness. The silver necklace hung lightly between her fingers, its anchor pendant catching the chandelier light and sending fleeting glimmers across her knuckles, and she could feel an almost magnetic pull from the way he observed it, as though the piece contained a hidden language only he could read. Victor tilted his head slightly, the motion subtle but deliberate, signaling not aggression but inquiry, a careful invitation for her to bridge the gap between uncertainty and revelation. Emily's mind raced, cataloging every subtle expression, every fractional movement, trying to anticipate his intent while remaining composed, aware that this delicate balance held the key to understanding the sudden gravity of the moment. The warm glow of the chandeliers illuminated the rows of tables, their polished surfaces reflecting crystal glasses and golden accents. Yet to her it felt as though the entire room had narrowed to a single circle, a space defined solely by the presence of him, her, and the delicate object in her hand. She noticed the faint crease of thought on his brow, the slight narrowing of his eyes, and realized that Victor Romano was piecing together a narrative that transcended the immediate moment, threading together past and present, memory and observation, into a silent dialogue only they could share. Her fingers tightened briefly around the chain, grounding herself, yet the coolness of the metal reminded her that some truths were heavier than they appeared, carrying stories of loss, connection, and recognition. The soft strains of the string quartet seemed distant now, almost irrelevant, their melody drowned by the internal rhythm of rapid, shallow breaths and the weight of unspoken questions suspended in the air. Emily took a small, deliberate step back, and Victor's gaze followed, unflinching. A calm presence that measured rather than commanded, probed rather than pushed. His subtle movements suggesting a patience tempered with quiet insistence, a silent request for acknowledgement, for engagement, for the recognition that this encounter had been crafted by more than chance. She felt a rush of clarity mixed with apprehension, understanding that the necklace was more than a simple artifact. It was a conduit to a past entwined with meaning, a key to uncovering narratives long obscured, and that their shared attention to it was a prelude to revelations that would unfold with a precision and weight neither could ignore. Victor's stance shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible cue that suggested a bridge, an opening, a moment to connect history and presence, and Emily sensed the fragile possibility of trust forming in a space dense with expectation and tentative comprehension. The room, the crowd, and the ambient light became secondary peripheral elements, framing the primary tension that existed in the small, concentrated field between them, the air vibrating with anticipation, curiosity, and the invisible threads of connection beginning to weave themselves in subtle electric patterns. Emily breathed deeply, steadying herself, realizing that the next moments would define the trajectory of understanding. A delicate negotiation between revelation and discretion, curiosity and caution, and that the necklace, the chain, and the silent weight of recognition had drawn them together at a precipice of discovery, poised on the edge of narrative and consequence, where every gesture, every glance, and every pulse of attention mattered profoundly, shaping the unspoken story that had begun to unfold before them. Emily Parker's fingers lingered on the necklace, feeling the smooth metal edges press gently against her skin, as though anchoring her to the gravity of the moment. The soft murmur of the gala returned in faint waves, a distant hum beneath the focused intensity that had wrapped the small corner of the room in silence. Victor Romano remained poised, his posture unchanging yet magnetic, a presence that seemed to bend the air around them with quiet insistence, compelling attention without overt motion. She shifted subtly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance that had formed, sensing that any sudden gesture could break the fragile thread of understanding between them. Her green eyes traced the lines of his face, storm blue eyes mirroring her curiosity and trepidation, and she realized that the questions he carried were embedded not in words but in the unwavering intensity of his gaze. The chandelier light played across the polished marble floor, fracturing into shards of gold and reflection that danced over the table linens and crystal glasses. Yet Emily felt removed from it all, tethered instead to the silent dialogue unfolding in the space between them. Victor's hand moved fractionally, almost imperceptibly, not to touch but to gesture, a nuanced motion that suggested both patience and expectation, a quiet entreaty for acknowledgement, for engagement, for the smallest indication that she understood the resonance of the necklace she held. She inhaled slowly, drawing in the warmth of the room mingled with the faint scent of cologne and polished wood, the tangible environment grounding her even as her mind raced over fleeting memories and fragments of a story half remembered, half feared, that the pendant seemed to embody. The soft ripple of silk and the faint clatter of glass from passing servers were background notes to the symphony of tension, anticipation, and tentative connection that had crystallized in the small, concentrated field between them. Emily's muscles tensed and released in careful rhythm with her breathing, the subtle pressure of the necklace grounding her, the anchor pendant a reminder that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary significance. Victor's lips moved slightly, forming words she could not yet hear, but the cadence of his breath and the faint shift in his shoulders suggested an unspoken narrative, a silent thread bridging past and present, grief and recognition, inquiry and understanding. Every fraction of movement, every tilt of her head, every blink of her eyes seemed to be catalogued, measured, and interpreted, creating a shared language of observation and response that transcended the spoken word. She felt the electric anticipation in the space between them, a charged tension that was delicate yet undeniable, the quiet prelude to revelation, the moment where patience, awareness, and instinct converged. Emily's heart beat in time with the subtle rhythm of his presence, and she understood that this was no longer a simple encounter. It was the opening of a narrative, a careful unfolding of history, memory, and possibility, held in the interplay of a glance, a gesture, and the cool, reflective surface of a small silver necklace that had become far more than a mere object, a vessel of meaning, connection, and discovery that demanded attention, contemplation, and the first tentative step into understanding the story they were about to navigate together. Emily Parker's fingers tightened instinctively around the necklace, the cool metal an anchor in the swirl of tension that seemed to thrum between her and Victor Romano. Each second stretched, heavy with anticipation, as she measured her own breathing, careful not to betray the mix of apprehension and curiosity that raced through her. Victor remained still, a pillar of calm yet unyielding attention. His storm-blue eyes locked onto hers with a quiet insistence that demanded engagement without a single word. The soft glow of chandeliers above fractured into countless reflections on the polished marble floor, crystal glasses, and gold-accented table settings. Yet all of it faded from her awareness, leaving only the suspended space between them, where meaning, recognition, and unspoken narrative coalesced. Emily sensed that every subtle motion, every tilt of her head, every fractional adjustment of her grip on the chain, was being observed and interpreted, catalogued into a silent dialogue that neither could speak aloud yet both understood in full. She shifted slightly, careful not to step into the path of invisible boundaries he had established, feeling the weight of history and significance press gently against her chest. Victor's gaze softened fractionally, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement, and Emily realized it was not threat but a measured curiosity, a silent request for recognition, for understanding, for the acceptance that this object, this necklace, carried more than metal. It carried memory, story, and connection. The distant strains of the string quartet provided a muted rhythm beneath the charged stillness, the background hum of conversation and laughter now secondary, peripheral to the gravitational pull of the interaction. Emily's mind raced, tracing memories of family, fleeting conversations, the faint echo of stories overheard in childhood, linking threads that had always seemed disconnected until this moment. Victor's hand moved subtly, a gesture of precision and purpose, hinting at communication without crossing into intrusion, an unspoken bridge between his perception and her understanding. Each pulse of her heartbeat resonated against the silent tension, mirrored by the measured cadence of his presence, creating a rhythm that felt both fragile and inexorably strong, binding the present with past resonance. The pendant swung lightly as she adjusted her hold, catching the light and sending glimmers across the polished floor, reflections that danced like fleeting insight, teasing understanding just out of reach. Emily could feel the air around them thickening with anticipation, charged with recognition, with curiosity, with the promise of revelation, and she understood that the necklace was no longer merely an object. It was a key, a signal, a silent summons to the unveiling of history, of connection, of truths waiting to emerge. Her breath hitched, and she allowed a slow exhale to steady herself, aware that the next movement, the next glance, could initiate the first tangible step toward unraveling the narrative embedded within this small object, bridging the gap between her ordinary life and the extraordinary, deliberate attention of Victor Romano. She shifted her weight, just enough to meet his gaze fully, and in that suspended moment, every flicker of light, every subtle inflection of expression, and every quiet motion became a piece of a story unfolding, delicate yet unrelenting, fragile yet compelling, poised on the edge of discovery, where comprehension, recognition, and connection hovered just within reach, waiting to be claimed by understanding, awareness, and the silent, shared acknowledgement of the weight and significance contained within a single silver necklace. Victor Romano's storm-blue eyes softened almost imperceptibly as Emily Parker held the necklace a little closer, feeling the subtle weight of its history settle in her palm. The room around them, golden light spilling from chandeliers onto polished marble floors, faded into a blur of muted motion as their attention locked in a quiet, potent exchange that seemed suspended outside of ordinary time. Emily's green eyes traced every subtle line of his expression, noting the gentle tightening of his jaw, the slight tilt of his head, the way his gaze lingered not on the crowd or the glimmering glassware, but on her and the small silver pendant that had unknowingly bridged past and present. She drew in, a slow, controlled breath, letting the ambient warmth of the gala mix with the cool metallic weight in her hand, grounding her while her mind raced through fragmented memories and half-understood connections. Victor shifted slightly, a measured movement, no louder than the whisper of fabric across polished shoes, signaling attention without intrusion, a subtle invitation for Emily to engage with the unspoken narrative that the necklace carried. She felt the pull of curiosity entwined with apprehension, a delicate tension vibrating through her chest and fingertips, each beat of her heart synchronized with the unspoken rhythm of the space between them. The pendant caught the chandelier light again, glimmering in fractured reflections across table surfaces and crystal glass, and Emily realized that every flicker of illumination seemed to echo the weight of stories embedded within the simple object. Memories she had not lived yet felt inexplicably familiar. Victor's lips parted ever so slightly, the faintest breath, a prelude to words unspoken but felt, a measured signal that comprehension and connection were possible if only she allowed herself to acknowledge the resonance between past and present. The hum of the gala, the soft strains of the string quartet, and the gentle murmur of conversation faded further into background static, replaced by the electric stillness that existed in the narrow field between them, the charged space where intent, recognition, and the weight of history met. Emily's fingers flexed around the chain, the anchor pendant swinging gently as though alive with significance, and she felt a tentative understanding begin to emerge, a recognition that the object had transported them both to a shared narrative, fragile yet undeniable. Victor's stance, unwavering yet subtly inviting, suggested patience and curiosity tempered with an unspoken expectation, an acknowledgement that the necklace was not merely an artifact but a key, a conduit through which stories long hidden could be discovered and connected. Emily's heart rate steadied, a slow exhale releasing the tension, and with it came the recognition that this was no longer a moment to merely observe but a moment to participate, to bridge history and presence with deliberate awareness. The polished marble, the gold accents, the distant laughter of gala guests, all became secondary to the magnetic, almost gravitational force of attention that the necklace had summoned, anchoring both of them in a narrative that was beginning to unfold with quiet inevitability. Every glance, every subtle motion, every flicker of reflection on the silver pendant formed a tapestry of connection, threading the past into the present, creating a space where discovery, understanding, and shared recognition hovered on the edge of clarity. Emily met Victor's gaze fully, storm blue meeting green, and felt the first tangible pulse of a story unspooling, delicate, precise, and irrevocable. A story that demanded attention, awareness, and the careful acknowledgement of truths that had long waited in the shadows to be revealed. Emily Parker took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of the silver necklace pulse lightly against her palm, as if it carried a heartbeat of its own, connecting her to something far larger than the glittering room around them. Victor Romano remained still, storm-blue eyes fixed on her. Yet in their intensity, she detected the faintest trace of acknowledgement, a bridge between recognition and understanding that hovered in the space between them like an invisible thread. The soft hum of conversation, the delicate clink of crystal, and the muted strains of the string quartet receded into the background, leaving only the suspended tension, a concentrated field where time felt slowed and compressed, every second stretching with latent significance. Emily's fingers flexed lightly around the chain, sensing the subtle vibrations that seemed to echo the weight of history embedded in the pendant, the anchor shape reflecting faint golden light as though highlighting the path from past to present. Victor's posture remained poised, commanding yet unobtrusive, each micro-movement deliberate, a silent invitation for her to step closer into comprehension without fear, to acknowledge that the object she held was more than a relic. It was a conduit for memory, narrative, and the delicate unfolding of truths long hidden. Emily's chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, the cool air of the ballroom brushing against her skin, mingling with the warmth of chandelier light and the faint perfume lingering from passing guests, creating a sensory backdrop that amplified the intimacy and gravity of the moment. She shifted subtly, careful to maintain composure, aware that every motion was being noted and interpreted in the unspoken dialogue that existed between her and Victor, a conversation conducted entirely through gaze, gesture, and the shared presence of the necklace. The room's golden reflections fractured across polished marble floors, table surfaces, and crystal glasses. Yet to Emily they formed only a peripheral landscape, framing the essential truth. She and Victor were participants in a quiet, electric exchange that transcended ordinary perception. Victor's lips moved slightly, the faintest exhalation forming words that remained unspoken yet resonated with intent, signaling both recognition and expectation. An acknowledgement that the necklace was a key, a signal, a silent summons for understanding, and that the unfolding narrative required patience, attention, and deliberate engagement. Emily's heart beat steadily now, in concert with the subtle cadence of his presence, each pulse reinforcing the gravity of the encounter and the delicate potential of discovery embedded in a single, unassuming object. She lifted her gaze fully, meeting his storm-blue eyes with her own green, and felt the first tangible pulse of connection, a mutual awareness of shared history, memory, and the bridge between them, illuminated by reflections of light that danced across the anchor pendant. In that moment, Emily understood that the necklace had transformed from a simple piece of metal into a vessel of meaning, a silent witness to a story waiting to be revealed, a story of recognition, trust, and the quiet forging of an unspoken bond. Every breath, every flicker of attention, every micro-movement of hands and eyes converged to create a narrative rich with suspense, delicate yet potent, precise yet inexorable, a story poised on the edge of understanding, ready to unfold. As both Emily and Victor stood suspended in the silent acknowledgement of the truths the necklace had begun to unlock, each aware that the next moments would define the trajectory of their connection and the revelation of history's long kept in shadow.